Hello folks, first drive today of the new BMW iX2. Now this new iX2 is sort of a sibling of the iX1 and it shares really quite a lot with the iX1. It is 19 centimetres longer than the outgoing X2 and it's actually even 5 centimetres longer than that iX1. What you will see on this car, it's got more of a swooping roofline, it's got more of a rake on the windscreen. It altogether has a far more sporty look. Now, styling on BMWs has been a little bit controversial of late, I think it's fair to say, but they have gone for that familiar traditional sort of shark nose on this. It's got the new four-eyed lights. There's also an optional illuminated grille. Let me know what you think in the comments. Ugly duckling or handsome prince? So you can see how that roofline sweeps down here. You've got this big spoiler, aggressive looking tail lights. Everything's looking very sporty and aggressive. And then if we open up the boot, like so, you'll find surprisingly a slightly larger boot than you get in the iX1. Between 30 and 50 litres more, if I'm not wrong. There's also some useful underfloor storage in there. So this xDrive30 does 267 miles of range, 0 to 62 in 5.6 seconds, and prices start around about 57.5 grand. Now the eDrive20, which is the front wheel drive version of the car, does 0 to 60 in 8.6, has 283 miles of range, and starts at about £51,500. Both cars are capable of 11 and 22 kilowatt charging, and at 130 kilowatt charging you can put 75 miles of range in the car in just 10 minutes. Onto the interior folks, and while some of the competition have downgraded their interiors in recent times, markedly so in some cases, BMW hasn't. I think they're some of the best interiors on the market at the moment. Now, it's not all sweetness and light in here. There are some areas where materials don't feel quite so good, but generally everything's very premium. And you've got several touches in here that are taken from cars much higher up the range than the iX2. The steering wheel, you know, the infotainment system. So largely it feels extremely premium in here. One of the first things I've got to talk about are these seats, because they just get hold of you like nothing else. Honestly, they're so nice, really comfortable, but really cosseting. So when you are throwing the car around a little bit enthusiastically, you stay put, which is very important. I think possibly when nobody's looking later, I'm going to unbolt this and take it home and I'll stick it in my lounge. I could live in this thing, I love it. The infotainment system's great. It's the new version of iDrive, it's OS 9, which is the latest version. There's been a lot of attention paid to try and keep things at the first level within this so that you don't have to go digging around in menus for absolutely everything. It is touchscreen controls from the aircon, but they're always present and you can get to more or less everything with one or two touches. It's not particularly problematic. OS 9 of iDrive, by the way, is based on Open Android. It comes with a variety of apps on tap, including a subscription-based service where you can have things like video on demand and video games. In future, you're actually going to be able to bring your PlayStation or Xbox controller in and pair that up with the car, which might be handy for those of you with families if you have to stop and charge anywhere along your route. The screen's nice and bold and colourful. There's also a very good driver information display there, and you'll see everything just curves around nicely, so you've always got everything you need in your line of sight without anything ever becoming too distracting. Down here we've got a mobile phone charger, wireless charger, a couple of cup holders, 2 USB-Cs. You've then got a very dainty little drive selector here, your start stop button, and a proper rolling knob thing, which is really nice sort of knurled metal finish. It might even be a very good plastic. I can't quite make up my mind, but whatever it is, it feels very premium. And in practice, when you're driving, that's just so much better and probably safer than having to rub your finger along something up here in the hope that it does what you're asking it to. You've also got really useful buttons and dials on the steering wheel and not a haptic in sight, so that makes Jimmy a happy boy. Under here we've got a nicely damped but very shallow centre console, but it is sort of floating, so underneath there's plenty of storage as well. As soon as you sit in the car, really, it feels like a cockpit that's kind of wrapping around you. But it doesn't feel claustrophobic in any way. But it certainly gives you the impression that this is going to be a sporty little number. as I said initially, it's just great to see BMW still doing proper interiors when so many others seem to be cutting corners. Well done. Once you move into the back, I'm afraid to say it's not quite such a happy story as that lovely front cabin. We'll start with the footroom. There's not enough of it. Okay, you do feel like you're sat up quite high in the back here, and noticeably higher than the driver and the passenger, and it's also a bit firm under the old buttocks, even when they're well padded like mine. There's not a huge amount of headroom, and I've actually just smacked my head climbing in here because of the slope of the roof. I don't know why, it seems quite deceptive, but yeah, I've just smacked my head doing that. At least it hasn't made my hair fall out. And when it comes to the middle seat, I think you'd only ever really use it in emergency, or certainly for very short trips, because there's not a great deal of room to put your feet. There is a slight hump in the floor because this is not a ground up EV. You can obviously get an X2, which has got a petrol engine in it. So yeah, it is certainly a little bit more compromised than that glorious front cabin in here. You have got a couple of USB-Cs down there. Material quality is still excellent throughout, really. But certainly you wouldn't want to put a 6'3" adult in the back of this car because they really wouldn't be very comfortable at all. We've already established that the iX2 exists to be the sportier sibling to the iX1, but when you get behind the wheel, that's absolutely not in doubt. The suspension is much firmer than you would expect, even in standard mode. All cars get adaptive M Sport suspension, but even in its standard mode, it is very firm. And certainly when you go up to full kind of sports mode, you really know you're in a car that's designed to handle more than it is to cosset your buttocks over the rough stuff. Now, BMWs are typically rear-wheel drive cars, but this one's all-wheel drive. However, what they've done with this car is adapted things so that when you push on a bit more, it actually throws more power to the rear axle. So when you're driving spiritedly, shall we say, it has a lot of those classic BMW characteristics. You know, you can feel a lot more action going on at the rear end than at the front. The steering's perhaps a tiny bit vague at times. There's I don't know, a certain numbness to it. Put it in sport mode and that definitely firms up, and it's a better steering experience, I think, in sport mode. But if you're getting in this car thinking you're getting yourself a sort of slightly sportier looking family SUV, it is more than skin deep, that sporty feel. You know, it is a very different feeling car to the iX1 to drive. So if you're considering this car for something to do the school run in, perhaps your commute to work, pootling around town, going to the shops, that kind of thing, possibly you're better off looking at the iX1. However, if you want something that can do all that, and you don't mind a firmer ride while you're doing all that, you don't mind losing a bit of headroom in the rear, and you want generally something that feels much more like an M car, then the iX2 can do it for you. This thing's never happier than when it's on the twisty stuff. It absolutely eats up the bends and it gives you a ton of confidence. Now, despite the fact it's all-wheel drive, the way BMW have engineered this is that it actually pushes more power into the rear axle when you're pushing it. So in those bends and twists, it feels much more like what you know, a characteristic BMW. It feels like a BMW should drive in those bends. Despite repeating myself I don't know how many times, there's a lot about this driving experience that reminds me of an M car. Just the sounds are different. Now, if all those bags of power that you've got on tap are not quite enough for you, you will find yourself a little flappy paddle here on the left. And as soon as you do that, it goes from being a bit of a beast to a ferocious monster. You certainly get a bit of torque steer as well, so I would suggest only engage in boost mode if your talent level matches your confidence. So I think with that adaptive suspension, if they'd have given you an option for an even softer, more comfortable setting than its lowest setting, I think that would have been a good thing. I think the car would have benefited from having perhaps slightly more direct steering feel as standard. because it does feel just a little bit light and a tiny bit numb at times, but it is all quite customizable, folks. And if those things are massively important to you, just get an iX1, all right? If you want a sporty drive, if you want something that you can throw a lot into the boot of, you can fit the kids in the back, but you still want to go and have a laugh at the weekend, then the iX2 will deliver that for you. All in all, I think the iX2 offers something different for people that perhaps don't just want a bog standard family SUV, or perhaps they want that practicality some of the time, but the rest of the time they really want something a bit livelier, something that feels a bit special, especially if you're an enthusiastic driver. If you'd like to see the latest lease prices on an iX2, check out the link to Lease Loco in the video description and pinned as the top comment. It will take you to all the latest deals at the time you click that link. Please give this video a thumbs up, please leave a comment, and please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. It really is the best way of supporting what I do, and if you want to see more of it, do all those things and that will be a massive help. Thanks ever so much for watching, folks. I'll see you on the next one.